Welcome everybody to this session. We've got Zeni Thumbadoo who will be doing this presentation, and at this point I tried to do some research on the Zulu word, and I decided I will leave that all up to Zeni. So without further ado, you didn't come to listen to me. Zeni Thumbadoo, what can I say? Zeni Thumbadoo has been the Deputy Director of the NACCW since 1997. That's just 3 years after the democracy. And Zeni became the Deputy Director. She's a social worker and a child and youth care worker. Zeni has dedicated her entire working life to the children's sector in South Africa, and is currently the chairperson of the professional board for child and youth care workers. Zeni is also part of the board of governors of the Global Social Services Workforce Alliance. Zeni's expertise and mind lies in programming, and that is where the scale-up of where Isibindi originates, and the scale-up of Isibindi. And it doesn't stop there, it carries on. And again, as the Chief Director, speaking on behalf of the Deputy Minister just a while ago, quoted Zeni on what the NACCW with Zeni's programmatic mind is achieving with child and youth care workers in schools. So with that, I was just saying to Zeni earlier, we need hopefully in the next conference, we'll just have a session on Zeni Thumbadoo and everything that's happened with child and youth care workers and social services. So over to you, Zeni. I will mute and take my video off.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, Eddie. And it is my pleasure to be here presenting my research findings at the NACCW conference. I'll just put on my presentation. And so we can start. Thank you. Thank you. It's been a long journey, more than 6 years of completing my research and presenting it here today. And as I said, Eddie, it is my pleasure to do my first presentation of this research here at the NACCW conference. My presentation title is Inhlanganisela, Integrated Patterns of Practice. And I just want to give credit to my supervisors, Professor Ray Bhagwan and Professor Jim Anglin, who was a co-supervisor as I worked towards this research. Just to say, Isibindi is the Zulu word meaning courage. And this research pays tribute to, I need to be a little bit louder, but can I just actually have my screen off here, Malini? I won't be able to go much. Just take that off. Thank you. This research pays tribute to more than 8,000 child and youth care workers who served children through the Isibindi model with both spirit and with love. They inspired me with courage to complete this research and my PhD. So I'm here presenting because of you. I am because you are, and your legacy will indeed live on. The research approach I took was a qualitative research approach with a grounded theory methodology to guide the inquiry and to understand how Isibindi child and youth care workers practiced in South African communities. The study was guided by the following research questions, which were: what are the unique needs of children in communities in South Africa? How is child and youth care practiced within the Isibindi model? And how does it respond to the needs of children in the communities that they work? And of course, lastly, what is the theoretical framework emerging from this child and youth care practice? The aim of the study was to understand the unique needs of children and families within the different community contexts across South Africa, and to create a theoretical framework to understand how child and youth care practice within the Isibindi model responds to this need. Just to say, my research sample were child and youth care workers, children and youth, and community members from 3 different Isibindi projects around the country that were identified as the best functioning projects. So I was looking for best practice, and I also used child and youth care workers in groups, in focus group discussions, and had 31 participants in those groups. Though just to say that grounded theory is based on the systematic generating of theory from data that itself has been obtained from social research. So my research looked at what was child and youth care workers saying, and to say from that, could there emerge a theory of practice that is unique to South Africa that could be relevant to the child and youth care sector. Central to a grounded theory approach is a search for what is called a core category or a core theme or a core, the fundamental aspect that emerged in the research. The goal of grounded theory is to generate a theory that accounts for patterns of behavior that are relevant or problematic for those involved. So we were looking for what is a pattern of behavior that actually comes from what we've seen in the data provided by the child and youth care workers, children and youth, and of course community members. The search for the main or core category in a grounded theory approach is a search for the central and all-embracing category that is able to integrate all the other categories into a conceptually coherent framework. So there might be other categories or other themes that are lesser, but they must all be able to be subsumed and integrated into the core category. And what was interesting and fundamental is that the core category that emerged in this research was practicing intentionally. Now, you would know that intentional practice might be one of the 23 or 25 characteristics of child and youth care work. But in South Africa's practice, it came out as the core category, practicing intentionally. And this is how it came out from the data, that the child and youth care workers demonstrated that they were appreciating context, that they actually understood where they were working, the children's context, their own context, and they were able to integrate their own practice wisdom, their own essential culture and journey in life into the work that they were doing. And in that way, by appreciating context and integrating practice wisdom, they were able to apply discretionary judgments in the way they practiced. And this resulted in what I understand was a very intentional practice, where child and youth care workers did practice intentionally. Now, the next piece and this is how we basically presented the core category, was practicing intentionally, which was integrating practice wisdom, appreciating context, and applying discretionary judgments. And this came from the data. As one child care worker said, we have to be creative and do the theory our way. We have to do it our South African way. Basic social processes are what Jim Anglin calls considerable explanatory power in relation to the phenomena being studied. These are processes that are pervasive. They are actually processes that are free from the bounds of time and space, and they can be generalized into all the different categories. So what I found was that embedding spirit in practice and embedding love in care were the two basic processes that infused the core category of practicing intentionally. And when we talked about embedding spirit in practice, I'm talking about child and youth care workers talking about their own self-transformation that brought about the spirit in their practice, how they became intentional practitioners, and how Ubuntu was used as a guiding construct in their practice. Also, in understanding embedding love in care, the data shows acts of kindness, gestures of caring, and capacity from the child care workers to create loving experiences for children. And so embedding spirit in practice and embedding love in care. In my next picture here, a diagram shows that this infused the practicing intentionally. So the way in which child and youth care workers practiced intentionally was through the effective use of these basic social processes in the way they worked. And the last information that came from the data were the subcategories. These are called in my thesis the integrated elements of practice. Child and youth care workers practice relationally with children, with family, but most interestingly with community stakeholders. They build relationships with community stakeholders in a very special way in order to bring services to children and families. They created a child rights culture in communities. They were teaching children and families their rights, but also they were strongly advocating for children's rights. And lastly, they were championing for social justice and equity. They were doing this to creating access to the resources and opportunities that were available to children and families in communities, in resource networking and bringing resources and networking them to children and families. And lastly, in social educating children and youth and families as well in the programs that they offered. So according to grounded theory, the grounded theory approach, the emerging theory is fractured descriptively, which I've shown you how I've done that. And now it gets put together conceptually. So it has to be lifted into a theory or into a concept after being fractured. And so enter Inhlanganisela. Inhlanganisela is an isiZulu word referring to a multi-pronged system of activities which result in a web of movements, all with different directions, but all aimed at a singular outcome. The child and youth care workers, like true African artisans, they exhibited intentionality in weaving the different threads of child and youth care practice into patterns of practice that were contextualized and synthesized into a unique response to the individual child and family. So they dipped into their toolbox of child and youth care practices, and they chose what was absolutely unique and relevant to this child, to this family, and they wove it together into that pattern. And just like the final product of a basket or a woven article is more than just the individual threads of which they are constructed, it reflects also the presence of the crafter. So the child and youth care workers were very present in what they were doing, because so too, the sum of the individual practice interventions of each worker was more than just a simple collection of individual interventions. They were not ticking off boxes. This is red and this is blue, and that's what you do if a child is abused. They were actually applying their assessment and their capacities in their work. The Inhlanganisela framework deepened and theorized child and youth care practice in communities in South Africa. It illustrated and integrated a weave, and weaves an important word in my thesis. It integrated the weave in child and youth care practice. Each child and youth care worker demonstrated an individual, unique weave in an integrated pattern of practice. This tells you how those different elements that I had presented come together in my thesis and is presented in this very formal way. But I couldn't resist, of course, presenting it in the African way, representing the basket, the creativity of the basket weaver and the crafter. So this is what I have presented as integrating all these different elements into the Inhlanganisela integrated patterns of practice framework. As you can see here, that the child and youth care workers practiced intentionally, and that intentional practice is woven throughout all that they did. If you see on the left, you see the basic social processes. So as they practiced intentionally, they embedded spirit in that practice. And as they practiced intentionally, they embedded love in their care. And when the child and youth care workers responded intentionally to the integrated elements of practice, we saw them practicing relationally with children, with families, and with community stakeholders. We found that they created a child rights culture by advocating for children's rights, but by also teaching children and families children's rights. And lastly, they championed for social justice and equity by creating access to rights and opportunities to children and families through social education through programs that they offered, and through resource networking resources to children and families. And in this way, promoted an integrated pattern of practice, always centered on this child, this one child who is at the center of the Inhlanganisela framework. Kurt Lewis says that there's nothing so practical as good theory. And Hans says there's nothing so theoretical as good practice. And the grounded theory approach is a belief in the embedded nature of theory, that a substantive theory of practice is implicit in good practice. So I present you the Inhlanganisela framework, which is a substantive theory of practice that is implicit in good practice. I just round up with this quotation where the child and youth care worker just demonstrates how different elements are put together. I also play with children at the informal park. There, when you are playing, you still observe children. Meanwhile, they're playing. Some are withdrawn. That's when you, as a child and youth care worker, do you have activities to do with these children that are withdrawn? You have some discussions. And when you are talking about drug abuse or rape, and when you are doing those topics, you observe the children. Others, when you are still talking, they will do something like not listening, and others are crying. When you finished, the others, when you finish the topic, others would come to you and they would go aside and tell you that this has happened to me. This is whereby you act on what the child has said. And if you just pull out the pieces in this quotation, you will see that here you find a child and youth care worker using, of course, a safe space like the informal safe park, and making observation, which is child and youth care practice, and finding that withdrawn children require a little bit more to understand why they are withdrawn. And then she sets up structured discussion groups to test it out. And when she finds these children responding in particular ways, she follows up individually with them. It's just an interesting blend of practice. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I am open to your queries and questions. It's very hard to present in 30 minutes a 6-year PhD, but thank you. Over to you, Eddie.
Thank you very much, Zeni, and a mammoth undertaking in such a short time to present all of this. Just on a bit of clarity, Zeni, very interesting findings, the intentionality of practice. What it was intentional. So what guided this intentionality? Obviously, you had your evidence for that, but how was this guided?
Well, you see, what I found in the data that came directly from the child and youth care workers, the children and youth, as well as community members, was that the child and youth care workers understood the context in which they were working. They understood their community realities. They understood their culture. They understood the dynamics in that community. And so there was an awareness and appreciation of context. And then I found that they were able to bring in their own way of doing things. They were able to bring in their practice wisdom. They understood that it's no use going to families and saying that this is what theory tells you. They had to do it in ways that were relevant to that community. And in a way, they took the child and youth care theory that we know, and that, Eddie, I know you're a lecturer, so you know we teach this. But they took that and internalized it and represented it in a way that was with context and with their own wisdom. And then it allowed them, as I said, to make discretionary judgments. That means they took decisions that were smart, that were wise, that were always in the best interest of children. I found that they understood the frameworks of practice. They know the Children's Act. They know the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. However, they practiced in a uniquely South African way, intentional to that child and family.
That's interesting, Zeni, because again, as you say, I speak from the perspective as coming from the training department. And again, we would say that if you work intentionally, you'll be following an IDP. However, they know exactly what the needs of the families and the situations are. And they worked intentionally, almost rising to the challenge that was put to us by in Kimberley by Martin Brokenleg, when he said, indigenize your practice, indigenize the circle of courage. And it feels like your research has highlighted that has actually happened, and it's being done, and very interesting. And I love the fact that it's come out that even they're following the children's rights frameworks. I've just got some comments that Lizzie is saying she's grateful for I'm not going to try to pronounce the Zulu word. I tried to find it in the office here, what it meant. Nobody had to Google, and I wasn't sure we came up with the right answer. But she's thankful for the presentation here and for the conference, and at the right time. Lungis made a comment. We've got Isabel on as well. And again, Zeni, I was quite interested as well in the care aspect. I think care is, even though the word care might be abstract and not tangible, but we can see people demonstrating care. But you also spoke about embedded kindness and spirit, and those are quite intangible, abstract things. And how did that reflect in your data?
Yeah, you see, childcare workers were kind to children, and they said children things directly like, Auntie is kind. Auntie smiles at me. When Auntie promises she's coming to visit me, she comes to visit me. What was fascinating was not just their kindness and their caring, was that quite often children said, she's like a mother to me. That she's a loving person. Auntie shows us love. And in the context of poverty, and I don't just mean physical poverty, I mean emotional poverty. Some of these children are living in foster homes. Some of them are living with extended family. Some of them have lost their parents, or at least their mother. A kind auntie who comes in and actually can see them and respond to them in that caring way. It's interpreted to them as Auntie loves me. She is interested in me. She wants to see that I'm fed. She wants to see that I go to school. And the issue of loving, a couple of times in my research findings, almost bordered on mothering. Many children said that Auntie is like a mother to me. And I think that in the spirit of Ubuntu, where we understand that community members extend themselves in caring, loving ways, and even mother each other's children, I think there was, for me, a sense that the child and youth care workers were reclaiming some of the spirit in the community through their ways of practicing.
Thank you, Zeni. That's very, very heartwarming that child and youth care workers are living out and demonstrating the spirit of Ubuntu through their work. I don't have any other further questions that came up, Zeni. And all I can say to you is thank you, and thank you for saying in just opening, thank you to the child and youth care workers for this, and again in just validating what is being done in the community there, and that what we are all doing and what we all believe here as child and youth care workers is actually bearing fruit, and it's clearly being seen. So thank you for all your effort as well in putting the work into this research, which is not just for yourself, and it's valuable to the entire field of social service professions to use and inform going forward. Yeah, thank you very much. And I don't know if you've got anything else to say in closing. And just thank you to everybody for attending as well, and enjoy the next session.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eddie. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.